Welcome to What's Your Story. I'm Alex James, and my guest on What's Your Story today is Martin Allen. And welcome, Martin.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm going to let Martin introduce himself, and because his story is a complicated one, but it's also very sensitive. And I think you're probably the best person to introduce it and to start off wherever you're happy to start.
Myself, I am a dad of three children, not a father of three, but I'm a dad of three. And back in 2004, I had probably what was one of the most difficult decisions I've had to make in my life, and that was to leave my marriageable home. Consequently, from there, I went through, and I suppose best described the words from the Bar Council in London, that I went through one of the worst divorce and access cases in current and modern history. I was arrested 25 times with no convictions for being a dad. The court order I have for my children back in 2006 is over £100,000 worth of toilet paper.
Gosh.
The CSA themselves stole over £100,000 from my wages that made me go bankrupt in 2009. So I decided that being a dad and being the predominant parent of my children, so I sacrificed two careers, and one of those careers was being a professional golfer. Now, I don't just necessarily mean as a golfer, as somebody that would work in a golf shop. I was also a player, and I was a very talented player. But having children in your life is the greatest gift that life will give you, and that's a gift that I wanted to give my kids. I wanted to be there. I wanted to be a part of their life.
And that's why I wanted you to introduce yourself, because that kind of encompasses it. So let's go back to, because I want to get the whole story so that people can get to know what kind of person you were. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in a beautiful part of the world, and I'm very gifted to say this. I come from a place called Bethnal Green, East London, which makes me a Cockney. And we are a dying breed, because if you want to have a place in East London, you need about £500,000 for a one bed flat at the moment in time. So I come from quite of a, let's say, colourful background with my dad. Let's say that I didn't really have to pay for any drinks at any pubs or nightclubs or restaurants and so on and so forth. I had a very privileged upbringing. Some people may disagree with that, but let's say it was very, very, very colourful, and it kind of shaped me as the kind of person that I am today. And I look back on my past thinking, you couldn't do what I did then now. You just couldn't get away with it. You just wouldn't have been able to do
it. So you built, because you were telling me that you owned a golf club.
Yes, when I was a young boy, I had a chunk of money that I needed to invest. So I invested a chunk of money into a golf course. The aim was for me, my dream was that I wanted 4 golf courses for 4 daughters, and that was always my dream. I wanted 4 children. Ideally, I would love to have had 4 daughters, but I had a beautiful son in the middle that's named after my dad, and he's the 14th one in my family to be named, have that name. We got to 3 and there was complications, so we stopped at 3. But my aim was 4 golf courses, 4 daughters, and that was my dream.
So there you are, a nice Cockney boy, affluent young man with living the dream, really, because you bought your first golf course, and then you met your wife.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we met. Very very very. I can still remember it now. Her mother was dating a guy that used to come up to the golf course that I used to run at that time, and I was on television, and she saw me playing golf on telly, and the individual that I knew said, "Oh, I know that guy over there. He runs the golf course up the road," and she was desperate to see me.
Wow.
So he brought her up to the golf course on a day that I had to work. And what was frustrating me, that there was a British Grand Prix on at the time, and Nigel Mansell was winning it, and I really wasn't in a conversation mode. I wanted to watch the Grand Prix because I would normally go to see these Grand Prix rather than watch the Grand Prix. So, but I kind of looked and I thought, yeah, okay, she's younger than me and she's a bit cute, but being in that kind of industry, being in that kind of business, I really wasn't overly bothered, let's say. But a week later, she gave me a call and we went out on a date and I took her out around London and let's say the rest was history.
So you got married, you had a good marriage.
Yes, yeah. We
And
had a
then
good
you had
marriage.
your children.
Yeah, the kids come along.
And then things went a bit wrong.
Well, yeah, I think,
And
I
mean,
can't.
I don't want you to have to talk about your personal stuff within your marriage,
Yeah, it's
but
okay.
I'm
I
kind
think
of, you know,
we all get to that stage in our life where the road ends and one person wants to go that way, one person wants to go that way. And do you know what? I get that. I completely get that. And I never had a problem with the with us calling it a day. We took it as far as we could take it. My oldest daughter was my princess. She was the apple of my eye. My son had pneumonia 4 times in 2 years. My youngest daughter had what was called failure to thrive. So the first 18 months of her life, we were backwards and forwards weekly with hospitals, coinciding with my son having pneumonia 4 times in a period of 2 years. So we went through a very, 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 very stressful time. I nearly lost her when we had our last child. So I've never blamed her for wanting a fresh life, a fresh start. I've never ever blamed her for that. What I've always blamed her for, and not just myself, but anybody that has known me as their dad, was her behavior from when we separated. And that was the abnormality of it, let's say. But because of my background, but because of where I come from, the harder you push a cockney, the tougher you make the skin. The more you kick us, the more we will get up. So I got the divorce bit. Ridiculous why it had to go on the way it had to go on. There was no need for that kind of behaviour. I got all that. Didn't bother me. But my children, like a lot of families, my children were used as a pawn. And the courts used to have a saying that at that time that the children were better off with a bad mother rather than no mother.
When was this? How long ago was this, Martin?
2004 is when we called it a day. End of 2004 is when basically it all started to kick off.
Because you left the family home, didn't you? And left the children.
Yeah,
and did you think then that, okay, we're going to get a divorce, I'll have joint custody or I'll see them at weekends? So you had no reason to think
no.
This wasn't going to happen.
If my children fell over, it was me they would come running to. It was me that took them to school. It was me that was there at the plays, and it was me that collected them. It was me that took them to their after school activities. My son's tennis, my daughter's karate, my daughter's netball, their swimming. I was more than 50% involved in their life, and I will still make that challenge now to anybody. And I use the word anybody out there that knows me and knows the area where my kids are brought up. You'll never find one person that will tell you that I'm lying. None. Because my kids were my world. They were everything to me. And like a lot of people, when they get angry, they use a weapon, and the weapon to hurt you. And the weapon in this case were my kids. So yes, when I left, things were very amicable because I left with nothing. I left with 2 black bin bags of clothes. That's all I left with. I had a gorgeous house, beautiful house. Everything was in there, was bought and paid for. It was immaculate. It was like a show house. My kids had everything that they could ever desire and more. Their mother had everything that she could desire and more, but she craved the buzz. She craved the attention. Do you know what? I get that. We married when she was very young. I get that. But she didn't have to do what she had to do. You know, she did have a few people behind her pulling strings, a mother and a partner that she was seeing behind my back at the time that happened to be my ex-boss. But she did have people influencing her, but she ultimately was responsible for the actions what she took for my children.
And that was to restrict you from seeing them.
Yes, I mean, I would get arrested just as I was about to go around and see the kids by the police officer that she was, quote, friends with, where she would say, your dad don't want to see you. She would tell the children that you know, and I try and put this politically correct as possible, but you've got to remember my youngest was 8 and my eldest was 12 at the time. My children, she would say to my kids that that I had sort of slept with the older the mothers.
Yeah, so she accused you of being unfaithful, and she said some really awful things about you, which we can't repeat on here.
Yeah.
In full.
Yeah, there was 4 things that she said, and
they're the worst things that she could have said, really. Apart from the fact that you were a murderer, she never said that. But
no, but she used
she
the word
implied
that I was,
it.
Yeah, she implied I was related in some ways to sort of being some kind of contract killer.
What was her intention in doing that? Do you think?
To destroy me.
To make the children afraid to be with you.
She used to get the kids to go around the window, close all the house up at night, to say your dad's going to come around and kill you. Not the dad's going to come around to kill me, but the dad's going to come around and kill you. So she used to get the children. You've got to remember, my youngest was well, she wasn't even 8 at that time, to go around and close all the windows in fear that I might be there to kill them. So one minute I'm their savior, 1 minute I'm cooking them breakfast, and if they fall over, it was me that was there. 1 minute I'm everything to them, and then the next minute, you know, they're absolutely petrified. And this was constantly repeated and constantly beaten into them. And as you can imagine, it takes seconds to destroy somebody. Seconds. All you've got to do is look at somebody and say, oh, you look fat. And you go, you know, straight away, you know, your response is, because our insecurities are there. And it just opens the door and wallop. But can you imagine from a child's point of view? So she installed this fear into my children. But my children were, and still are, as frightened of her, more frightened of her than they could ever be of me. To put that mildly, sort of 3 years ago now, I saw my son for the first time in 9 years. And when I said to my son, we were out playing golf, you know, he was up visiting my parents for the weekend, and I got an invitation to go and see him for the weekend, and I took that, of course. But when we were out playing golf, just me and him, I stopped and I asked him, I said, of all of the things that's happened, no one's ever told me what I had done wrong, what I had done to you and your sisters to deserve to be treated in a way that I have been treated. And these were his actual words: nothing. But it's not worth the aggro I'm going to get from mum and my sister. So can you imagine the burden that's now been put upon my son's shoulders, that he has to carry in his life, knowing he had a brilliant relationship with his dad, knowing that was destroyed. And I'm not just talking about me. You know, this has happened to thousands of dads and also to mums as well. So can you imagine the burden he has to carry through his life? You know, he was put in a psychiatric hospital at the age of 11, allegedly that he tried to hang himself. No, because he wanted to live with his dad. I've read the report. She put him in there for 12 weeks because he was angry, because he wanted to see his dad. And to this day, he believes that it was his decision at the age of 11 to go to a psychiatric hospital. Really? What kind of 11-year-old knows what a psychiatric hospital is? I can guarantee you now, my kids didn't. You know, they didn't, you know, had no idea. from that point of view. So we knew where that was driven. And all of this kept on driving me and driving me and driving me and driving me and driving me. So every time I had to go to court, I kept on making challenges to the judge.
Did she do things like when you were supposed to have them? Did she stop them coming at the weekend, or did they suddenly decide they weren't going to come and see you?
Oh yeah, I had all that, and you know, I used to go around there and they weren't there. The house is in darkness, or
So the gap between you being able to see them was getting bigger. And then, of course, things could be said. I mean, I have heard this, and I'm not saying your wife said it because I don't know your ex-wife, but I have heard stories where the distance becomes so great, and then instead of saying to the child, oh, well, you know, we made a mistake in the date, the story starts to be that actually you're not bothering to come and see them.
Right, yeah. Very much the case. It's used as a benchmark. Now, if you think of an illness called Munchausen's and what Munchausen's is, and you think of what bipolar is, and you think of how that goes. So what Munchausen's is that Munchausen's creates a problem. So it creates and installs a fear into that problem. It creates a drama. So the individual that you're focusing on is absolutely petrified of what they are being told is going to happen and by whom. Now, the person that creates all of this comes to rescue them. I'm your rescuer. So I'm now going to come and I'm now going to be your savior. But I'm also the person that's created this problem. So I've created this devil, but I'm also the person to lift you up and carry you away. I'm your rescuer. And that is exactly what happened to my children throughout a number of many, many years, and still now. I'm still referred to, I'm still called the unpronounceable name that the mother was getting my 8-year-old to call me, because she thought it was funny. So she was referring to me, and I used call it the C word, getting all of my children to call me the C word. They were being made to write letters calling me a sperm donor. Now, what 8-year-old or 10-year-old knows what a sperm donor is? But when I'm making,
but your children didn't, and obviously you knew they didn't, because you'd brought them up.
Absolutely. So when I'm challenging this to the judge, and later on,
so let's backtrack there. So in the end, you had to go to court to see your children.
Dozens of times. But I'm very lucky because at that time my older brother was a director of Chambers. So not only did I have the best solicitors that money didn't need to pay for, thank God for that. Well, I had the money anyway, it was burning a hole in my pocket. But I also got access to some of the best silks, the best, Queen's counsellors, the best lawyers there is in the country. And I had 2 of the best family lawyers that are actually in this country at that point in time, that were under my brother's chambers. So I didn't go in there with some kid who's just ain't got a clue. I went in there with an entourage of people. Grateful enough from my point of view that they didn't charge me. They did it in their own time. But when you're going back to court once a month, and every time it costs you 5-10 grand, and you're doing it once every 3 to 4 weeks.
Most people couldn't do it, could they?
So the idea was to break me, mentally, emotionally, financially. And we proved this on the family justice panel when we got this together, that children from families like, upbringings of what's happened with my kids will never achieve their full potential. So when I challenged the judge about the C word, why have you allowed that to happen and what are you going to do? The judge turned around and said to me, what have I done to the mother for the mother to have created all this about? What have I done? It's, you don't say this to a child. So immediately I knew that I was facing a battle that I was never going to win. So I actually called the judge it while I was sitting there. Do you know what? If it's good enough for me, it's good enough for them. I might come from the East End of London. We were not privileged enough to go to university, but do you know what? Without people like me, people like that don't exist. So
So
they
you
rely upon that.
so you fought and you won. Did you win the custody of them in the end?
I got my children for 3 nights of the week, every week. But once again, you get hold of them one week and then you can't get hold of them the following week. Or she send them round in tatty old clothing and you'll send them back in brand spanking new clothing. My son had attention deficit disorder, so he was on a milder form of Ritalin at that time. But she used to send him over with no tablets after drinking a couple of bottles of Coke and eating Smarties. So he was like Spider Pig on the wall, on the ceilings. So I used to have, lucky for me, that by that time I had a beautiful home. So I learned techniques to how to calm him down, self-hypnosis and NLP. And I studied this, and I had a very big black chair that used to swing round and rock and do all that, all singing, all dancing chair. And I used to get my son in it, used to keep everything nice and calm. Never had any television, or very rarely did we have any television on. So we used to always talk, do homework, play Jenga, do that kind of things that you would do. Things rather than what they would do at home would be sit on the Xbox and play Xbox all day long. So their home life with me was more on a one-to-one and more of a personal point. But I never got custody back of my oldest daughter. By that time, the mother had turned her, my princess. And how can I describe my relationship with my eldest? Well, I am one of two. I have an older brother. My dad is a single boy. In my father's family, in 4 generations, not one female has been born. So yes, my mum's one of 3 daughters. So in my dad's side of the family, when my daughter was about to be born, I said to me, Dad, okay, I'm about to be a dad. And he said, oh, congratulations. He said, if it's a boy, I'll buy you a bottle of champagne. I said, what about if it's a girl? He said, I'll get you a crate of Magnums. So the female side of my family is just unbelievable. So when I phoned my dad and said, you better go and get a Magnum of champagne, this person, my dad, this tough nut of London that people would cross the road to avoid, just burst into tears, because not only is he a granddad, but he's got a granddaughter. So my eldest became the apple of everyone's eye. When I played in golf tournaments, she used to come when she was a baby. I used to put her in a seat in one of the buggies and get a friend of mine just to strap her up so she can come and watch her dad play golf. If I went to, it may sound silly, if I went to the toilet, she used to sit outside the door and wait for me to come out.
It's just absolutely heartbreaking, isn't it? I mean,
you can't. I've died a million times for my kids, and I will die a million times every day for my children. And I've said that I'm a dead soul. I am what would be best described as a dead soul. I can get the money. I don't care about the money. Yes, it was quite a lot of money. I don't care about the divorce because I've met and married somebody that I love and adore. But my relationship with my children, everybody knew me as their dad. They knew me more than I knew their mum. Mm. And they did everything with their dad.
So what was the change that happened because of your fight for the children? Even though you didn't, I mean, you got this change, but you still didn't get the children. But what was it that will make the difference for other dads, Martin?
Well, what I did is I started challenging the courts. So I started sending letters into courts and trying to push the courts into answering my questions. What I didn't realize is the letters that I was sending in was going to the same judge that didn't like me to begin with. And not just didn't like me, but it didn't like most dads, or any dad in a nutshell. So when I realized this, I decided to send it to the Lord Chief Justice. So I created a 9-page letter to the Lord Chief Justice The person at that time was Lord Nick Phillips. Charming man, mad as a box of frogs, incredibly intelligent, and a very, very powerful man. So I sent a letter 28 times, 9 pages, and I called him in there the same name as what he allowed his judge to call me. And I actually called it to him, I think more than once, actually, several times in that letter. How can you allow what you call a judge to do that? And in there, I put the QCs and the silks that represented me. Unknowing to me, after around about receiving about 20 of these letters, he contacted one of the silks that he was friends with that represented me, and he looked into my case. So just before I was about to post at number 29, because I was going to keep going, I didn't really care. I got an invitation to go to the House of Commons, and actually the House of Lords, to meet the Lord Chief Justice. And I was told that I would be the only person granted a one-on-one to see the Lord Chief Justice.
Wow.
So I got this letter, and I decided, and I had to take the letter up there with me. So I went up to the House of Commons. I won't go into full details about that, but we've spoken about that before in the past. I took the letter in now, got through the police security, took the letter in there, they knew who I was and so on and so forth. And I got taken from the main hall to a particular office that was made available for this meeting. This was 2009 at that point. So by now I've been separated from my children for 5.5 years. The damage has been done, has just been colossal. I've been receiving hate mail from my kids and so on and so forth. So I walked into this big room, and I met this incredibly charming man who walked up to me, shook my hand, and he said to me, before we go any further, "What do you want from me?" was his actual words. So I said, "No man, no woman, no aunt, no uncle, no nan, no granddad, no cousin, no child should ever go through what my children and I are going through, past, present, and future." And he said, "Good." He said, "Because I can't give you what you want." He said, "I can't turn back time and prevent what's happened." He said, "So if you want justice for you, sorry, but justice is all, can't be served." He said, "But what we can do together, we can potentially stop others from going through what you've gone through." Behind him, and I'm looking at this huge, beautiful table, was an absolute bucket load of paperwork on this table. And I'm looking at this thinking, what's that over there? What it was my life. From the day I was born to current time, everything about my life. So they had looked into me like the proverbial duck. They had school reports from when I was at school, even to a point one of his clerks said to me that I had the same teacher in my primary school for 2 years running. I had to go and phone my mum to answer that question. So they knew that the person that they were approaching and talking to had some levels of integrity, let's say. I wasn't some mug, some idiot off the street that was making it up. So they had investigated into my life quite fully and quite intensely. Okay, fine, fair enough. So Phillips sat me down and he told me that a proposal went through a couple of years prior, when the Labour were in government, where they wanted to create what was called a family justice panel, where they wanted to review the family law because they had Fathers for Justice banging on the wall. Now, the only way I can describe what a campaign for Fathers for Justice does, right? They think they're banging on a wall and they think they're making headroom. Well, what actually happens is the wall starts to get thicker along the other side. So the more things like Fathers for Justice were banging on a wall, the thicker the wall was getting on the other side, because governments see that as a terrorist threat. It's government that makes the changes. We elect the people to make those changes on our behalf. So we deal with the people that make those changes. We don't deal with government. So there's a guy called Erskine May. It's a fascinating story about Erskine May on the House of Commons. Erskine May is a man that died centuries ago, but he is the bookkeeper. So when you're watching and you're looking at the Speaker of the House, there's a bloke looking at him with a book. He will tell him what's going on. He's sitting opposite both sides of the heads. So the Conservative now to the left and Labour now to his right. He will tell them what they can and can't say. He is the Bible. Erskine May is the governor of government. But like everything in government, there's always a way around things. So Jack Straw refused to take it on board because he said it's a guaranteed failure for any minister, and any minister that would take it on would lose their job and lose their career, and no minister would want to do that. But government can take this on behalf of a member of the general public, if that member of the general public has sponsors. So Phillips asked me to go away, and he asked me to write a 2-page recommendation that I had to send in to the Justice Board. And the guy called Sir Alan Bleeth, who was a Lib Dem, I believe, at the time, was chair of the Justice Board. So I wrote up a 2-page recommendation with 3 recommendations on that. And one of them was a review on family law. So fathers, aunts, uncles could have levels of justice given to them. So my focus went from being on myself, which I knew was a complete waste of time. And I knew that my anger or frustration about myself would probably, I'll end up doing something really quite stupid to myself or to somebody else. So my focus went on, why would they allow that to happen? Why would they, well, you know, they're there to carry out a duty on behalf of the Crown. Why aren't they carrying out that duty? So I decided to challenge those that are responsible. So I put this recommendation in. It was heard on the following Justice Board meeting, and of course it was passed. So then I got a phone call from the head of the clerk at that time telling me that this has happened. Congratulations, you've achieved this. This now needs to go to government for approval. That was, well, I can't begin to tell you how that affected me and how that made me feel. I was basically on my knees by that point. Now it has to go to government, and now I need sponsors. So once again, the Lord Chief Justice decided to step in and become one of my sponsors. I had a lovely guy, Shadow, at the time, because he was fighting for his seat to become the next Prime Minister, was a guy called David Cameron. One of the most charming men I could ever meet in my life. The other one was a guy called Ken Clarke, Justice Minister, and Dominic Greaves, who became the Attorney General. 4 highly intelligent individuals. 4 very, very, very funny individuals. Was, you know, probably more Ken Clarke and David Cameron, but Ken was, I can't say a bad word about them because they opened the door. So I now needed to address government. So we needed to get this through. We needed to get everybody on board, because what happens is that when a panel is elected, a panel is only given 3 years. You're given a period of time to achieve your goal. This isn't something that can roll on for decades. This costs a lot of money to do. So I was given this task. So David Norgrove was elected to head it, and Lord Justice Ryder was elected once it had completed to do the final reports and findings to it. So we went to the House of Commons, where I was allowed to address the Commons, and I was allowed to use what was called to me 4 times. So I was allowed to say that C word 4 times. And it basically kind of ended by me saying that if you don't support this and you don't get behind this, these changes and these looking at this, then you are agreeing that any parent can get their child to call the other parent the C word. And if that's good enough for me, it's good enough for you. So if I'm going to get called it, you're going to get called it. So if you go against it, I'm going to call you the same name. And you can't complain about it because you're standing alongside somebody that got my 8-year-old daughter to call me the C word. Simple. This also coincides with the Baby P case. If most people will remember that very, very sad story in Haringey about that tragic, tragic child that got, well, you know, with his parents. So it kind of hit perfect timing. Everything was perfect. I seemed to be there at the right place at the right time with the right people for the right circumstances to do the right thing. So it got elected, and obviously the ayes elected it. That meant I became the first member of the general public in political and legal history to implement changes in Parliament on first read.
Wow.
So in 800 years of our legal history, not including any conflict of war, because Churchill enforced the same during the war, I became the first member of the general public to do so.
So does this mean now then, so that if you're a parent and you're divorcing, that you've got a panel now? That is that what it is that you've instigated?
The panel came through with lots of findings. Our job was to go out there, and our job was to find what was wrong. Certain reports were commissioned where we proved beyond any doubt the children that come from, let's say, separations such as myself will never reach their full potential. It's not even a percentage. They will never reach their full potential. We proved that people, you know, children like mine will be much more inclined to get involved with the police and drugs and problems. They will be much more inclined to repeat what they've been taught as well. So it's a vicious cycle. They get taught bad behavior. They will teach their children bad behavior. So you know, things like mediation was never law. So we enforced mediation to become law. Now, if a mother refuses mediation, the father now has the right to go for full custody. Penal orders, you know, you can now force a penal order. Now, most people don't realize this, that, okay, right, I drive a car. We all near enough all drive a car. We have a driving license. If we break the law, our license is at risk. Yes? Fair enough. Do you know judges have licenses?
No, I didn't.
Do you know lawyers have licenses?
I
Solicitors have licenses. They all have a license.
I knew doctors had to have something, didn't they, to work?
So
I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know that.
What keeps them? How do they keep hold of their license? They have to prove that they are up to speed with all the changes in law. That's why they have to have so much time away. That's why they have to go towards courses and study, because the law is constantly changing. Now, when Elizabeth, our Queen, took the throne, she signed all of her powers over to the church. So the church, she gave all of her powers over to the church. Then what happened is then the church signed all of their powers back over to the Queen. So rather than having two sets of separate laws, we have one. So hence she's the head of the church. So in 1953, there was a massive chunk of new laws that come in. There's a guy called John Hurst. I suggest that everyone looks him up. He's an absolute genius of a man. What he doesn't know about historical law doesn't exist. He's a guru of historical law, this man. And John and I have got on very, very well for many, many, many years. And he was very much a very strong guidance of historical law for me. So when we looked at things like magistrates, and we looked at things like solicitors and lawyers, and when you realize it, what you've got now as a parent going in now, you have a right to challenge. So if the mother, let's say, refuses mediation, or the father refuses mediation, under the new laws, you now have that right to challenge. Now, if that judge turns around and says, no, you don't, then they're not keeping up to speed with their law. So they're not keeping up to speed with the current changes. So if you're not up to date, you're in line for a bit of a knuckle rapping. You have the right to then challenge the judge. You have the right, if necessary, and with sufficient levels of evidence, to remove a judge from their chair.
Wow.
You do. You know, whoever's watching it, you have that right. And I tell you why you have that right, because you are responsible. And also, we are part of the crown. We are all a part of the crown. We are all a part of the monarchy. We are here to serve the monarchy. It's that call to arms. So, you know, if they want all of a sudden, you know, for me to go to war at the age of 54 years of age, and they want me to go to war, I'm out. There's nothing I can say. I'm off. It's just, it really is as simple as that. And it all comes down to that, about call to arms. So you are there to protect the crown. If somebody is not keeping up to date or up to speed with what the crown tells them that they are to do, you have the right to challenge that. And if sufficient levels of evidence is proven, you have that right to remove them from that, regardless of what anybody thinks about this law or that law. No, you have that right. And I know that because I've done it.
But Martin, you know, for I mean, it's not that because you're not Joe Average. You had these friends and these contacts, but
Yeah, but you got to remember,
you,
I'm a Cockney boy from Bethnal Green.
yeah, I know, but
I got to know these people because I went after them. I went banging on the door to, you know, to go and get them.
But where'd you get that? Where'd you get? I mean, I know it's obvious that you loved your kids, and I hope they watch this and realize, because what I'm thinking is, how did you get that energy to keep fighting? What, you know, when and you're going to say it's because you're a Cockney, but you know, I'm just thinking about that. That's, you know, for some dad who's watching this, or somebody who's involved with Fathers for Justice, yes, you've helped it because you've brought things to light, and you've made people do something about it. But it's still a hard fight, isn't it, if you're a dad wanting to see your children, and if the mother decides that she's taking that child away. I mean, I know a dad at the moment who is really struggling, and you know, he doesn't see his daughter for years, and he's really struggling to see her. It's heartbreaking.
It's the problem. We highlighted the problems. We told government about the problems as best as what we could. We put CAFCASS officers into schools because that's where children, you know, are best inclined to talk. We brought around a Bill of Rights for grandparents, which unfortunately run out of time. But the one thing I was so desperate to get done is I wanted a governance in place. I wanted a governance in place to govern the magistrates, to govern these judges, to sit there and challenge them. Why are you making that decision? You justify to me why you've made that decision. Unfortunately, that was one thing I just, you know, was not going to happen, which was wrong, because there should be a governance in place. But the energy I got was my anger, you know, my anger about, you know, about me as a dad. You know, you can't, you physically can't, you can't get your head around, you know, the anger. You know, I would kill for my kids. Of course I would. Any decent parent would, you know, any decent parent for their children would do that. Any decent parent will stand and fight for their rights for their kids. But when, you know, my son came round to me one day and he had bruises around his neck, and it was a hot day and he kept on having his collar was zipped up, and he told me how he got these bruises around his neck. My youngest came round with a massive bruise on her cheek, and she told me how that happened. My anger towards the person that's done this, which was their mother, was ferocious. But then that's what she wanted me to do. She wanted me to go around there. She wanted an excuse to put me inside. That was her terms. She wanted me to do time. as many years as humanly possible, 15, 20 years, whatever. She
So
didn't care.
what stopped you, given those circumstances? What is it that how could you be so contained when you're that angry and you just kept fighting? And even now, I mean, I suppose that's the most important question, is that now your children have grown up and you've got the comfort in some ways of knowing that you've made a big difference for other mums and dads and grandparents, but you still haven't. And as you said, you may never have that bridge for your children now, because it's and the years of loss. So how do you manage that now?
You can't manage it. You just have to live with it. How can you, and I talk about my eldest because she's little Miss Angry. I changed I done a nappy, the first nappy ever made, and I always change the bloody nappies. I fed her. I did the same to all three of my kids. How can you go from having the greatest gift that life will give you to all of a sudden being referred to as the C word and all the other vulgar things that I've been called? You can't live with it. You just, I was once told, go away and become the best person that you can become. Go away and look in the mirror. So when the Reaper comes knocking on your shoulder, you can look at him in the eyeball and say, I did everything that I could do. And I'd done that, and my anger was my fuel, because my children were victims. I'm a victim. The people that were responsible for that, for me, wasn't necessarily the mother, because it was the judge that allowed that to happen. It was the CSA that wanted to believe her to screw me over as much as they could to allow that to happen. So it was the authorities, for me, that were my problem. It was them that I needed to address. It was them that I needed to challenge. And when I got given that opportunity, oh my God, I went for it. I went guns for it. So I would, if someone was flippant towards me, I would call them the C word. And they were just going, horror, you can't say that. You can't. Well, why not? You're standing by somebody that openly calls me it. So, I put my trousers on one leg at a time, as well as they do. And to me, the equality, I kept on hearing throughout the last 2 decades that women want equality in work, and women want this and women want that, and they should fight for equality and all this. But when it comes down to them giving equality back to their children, well, that's a different kettle of fish. I brought them into this world. I carried them for 9 months, so I've got the right to screw you over as much as I want. Actually, no, you bloody well don't, because what's going to happen is that my children now have Stockholm syndrome. That's the long-term damage, that my kids will never be a part of my life as strong as what they should be. They don't just, they've not seen my parents in over a decade. They're frightened upon seeing my parents, because my parents and I obviously are very close. They've not seen their uncles and their cousins for a couple of decades. Why not? Because it's their mother's manipulative control. Who's responsible for that? Well, of course, yes, it is the mother. Yes, okay. But who's responsible for allowing the mother to do that, or the father to do that? Well, of course.
And that's what I was going to say. There are some mums whose
Absolutely.
fathers have indoctrinated the children, taken
Absolutely.
them away.
And you are 100% right. I had a very, 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 let's say, heated discussion a few years ago with a dad that was doing to the mother what mothers have done and had happened to me. And it was very, let's say, it was very disagreeable. And the bottom line of it is that I gave him no choice. Said, I will tell your children when they get older what you have done, and you will lose your kids, because they will walk away from you and they will never talk to you again. About a month later, he found me and come up to me and approached me. He said, and he sat me down. He said, okay, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what to do. Because he said so many vulgar things at this time. He said so many horrible things about the mother. It's things that he should have never said.
Mm,
Some of it was very true, but it still had nothing to do with the relationship between the mum and the kids. She was
mm,
a good mum to the kids, despite certain personality traits that she had that were slightly unusual. But it had nothing to do with the kids. She was a good mum. She loved her kids. So we mediated, in some ways, and I got him to sit down each of these children and tell them the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Now, the kids, well, two of them have gone to university and two of them have graduated. One of them is yet to go to university and graduate as well. But the relationship between all of them now is brilliant.
mm,
Yes, they're still angry with him, but now as they've got older, they can understand his anger,
mm.
and they're disappointed with him. So he now works really hard to build those bridges. And it's made him work very hard to build the bridges with the mother. And now the two of them, although they're never going to be together as husband and wife again, the
Mm.
two of them probably get on better now than they've ever done before. Because he realized that the long-term damage that was going to be created was colossal, just colossal.
I think that's, I mean, I'm divorced, and I think that it's something that perhaps I didn't give enough thought to when I left my marriage. I mean, even though my children were grown up, what I've learned since is that your children always want to keep the family. They need that. They need the support of both parents. But I didn't, I suppose selfishly, I was so wrapped up in the divorce that I didn't actually think about their needs, even though they were going off to university at the time. So I kind of felt, I suppose they're grown up now. Now I can do this. But actually, divorce has an impact on the children. I think even if you're grown up the age we are
Mm.
and your parents suddenly announce they're getting divorced, it's a big thing,
It,
and
it,
perhaps we
it
don't,
impacts.
yeah,
It
we don't
impacts on the
realize
ways.
that perhaps for the children.
Yeah.
But I think that for you with your story, I mean, it's incredible that you've gone through so much. It's made a change for other people, but it's sad that it hasn't actually made the difference for you. So in the future, I'm guessing that the hope is that eventually, but it, I can see by your face that you think it's not going to happen now, but in the future, at some stage when your children are grown up, have children of their own, perhaps they may understand a bit more.
I can only but hope and pray. As I said to my son, I left your mother, I never left you.
Mm,
Um, and I never left my kids. I walked out with two black bin bags of clothing, and that's all I walked out with, so they could keep everything else that was in that home. I didn't make her sell the house, so I could have a house. Um, I left them to make sure they stayed in a very comfortable position. I was still taking them to school when she was working, and I was still picking up from school until she decided to stop it and start playing games, because the kids were very much with me, very much as a strong dad. And my youngest daughter earlier on this year got married, and my baby girl's now now a wife. And the last time that she was with me, she wet herself in fear going down the stairs, going back to her mum. So she was that frightened of her mum that she she wet herself in fear going back. And that, to me, these things haunt me. Um, Things that they've probably forgotten. And I always say that children are more inclined to remember the bad things that's been told, even though if they're lies, rather than the good things that's happened.
mm,
And I've always said, give me my oldest daughter, face to face, and after 45 minutes, I'll have her crying, because she knows that what I'm saying is right. And I give her back those memories of me and her, and me and my son, and me and my youngest daughter. But as an absent father that's gone through, you know, and these are the words of the Bar Council, not me, you know, one of the worst divorce and access cases in current and modern history. Um, all I can keep doing is try to push myself forward to become the best person that I can be, to be the best husband that I can be for my wife, to be the best grandfather that I can be for my stepson. Um, and I love spending time with my step, you know, my grandson. He calls me pops. You know, he has two other granddads, blood granddads, of course, and I get on great with both those two guys. My wife's ex-husband and I are very, very good friends. We're great friends, and I've got a huge amount of time for him, as he has for me. But my grandson is where I pour a lot of my love into. I take him golf. It's the same as I took my other children golf. And I introduced him to the world of golf as I've introduced my other two, or my three children to golf. My son could have quite easily, he had an ability to play tennis at a very good age, you know, the ability to play golf at a very young age. And he could have quite easily turned professional, quite easily turned pro as a kid. But because it's related to me and my business, he was told, no, you're not playing golf no more. He was
There's
so
a
talented.
massive void there, isn't there, for you? I can almost
No,
feel
it's huge.
that. But
It's huge.
if they at some stage in the future just said, Dad, let's not talk about all that stuff, let's just move forward, would that just be enough for you, that they just wanted to be there? Would
Yeah,
you
of
be able
course.
to,
Of course it would. And
because although
obviously,
you're so hurt, and I
yeah,
could see that, even though you went to court, and I mean, when you're talking about the court, you sound so experienced. I mean, all that stuff about court is just over the top of my head. It's also complicated and complex, and you fought for such a long time, and at the end of it, it's going to help other people, but it didn't help you. So having gone through all of that, and at last, thank goodness, you've got a beautiful wife,
mm,
and you've got a new family
mm.
as well, but there is still this place in your life for your children. So if at some stage in the future they watch this, they couldn't fail to see that you love them and would always welcome them back.
Um, okay. I never left my kids. Um, you know, I know that they never got any cards that I sent them. I know that they never got any presents that I sent them. I know that. I know that every time I bought my son a mobile phone, or I gave my mum and dad the money to get him a mobile phone, and my dad got my son a mobile phone, that he got thrown down the toilet or run over or thrown out the window. My children are victims, the same as me. My anger is not with them. My anger really is not necessarily with the mother. She knows what she's done and she's got to live with that. Um, I'm no longer angry with that. You know, it's my anger is with the government, really. In all honesty, I still try to advise for the Family Justice Board and the Family Justice Council. I still try very hard to get government to look at put a governance in place for courts, and it desperately, desperately, desperately needs it, because even after we've proved beyond any question, beyond any doubt, the damages that's caused, and if it's still going on, then it's wrong. The law is there, it's changed. There is. Do you know how many laws that are there that tells the judge that the mother should always have access to the kids? Do you know? Should I tell you? Should I tell you? Doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. PR, parental responsibilities. That's the worst thing that anything could have ever happened, because basically what it means is you have to show responsibilities before you can be potentially gifted to being a parent. Really? So you got to put a roof over their head, food on the table. Do you know what? I get that from the 1960s and the 1970s, when the dads used to walk out the door and leave the mother with them to, you know, to fend for them. I get that. Come on, but this day and age, really? Does a dad have to prove? Does a mother have to do the same? Well, no, she doesn't. So there is not one law in this country that the Queen of this country has signed that turns around and gives the judge the right to say that the child should be with the mother. Not one law. We are all equal. And that is, the thing is, what does the church turn around and say? We are all equal, you know, in God's eyes. So if we are all equal, regardless of your sex, do you know what? That's the law. And if my children were to come knocking on my door right now, I know that it would all have to be spoken about at some point. But of all the names I've been called in this world, the one that I miss most is Dad.
Martin, we'll end it there. That is a wonderful way to end. And I hope that you get that again. I do hope that one day they come home. Anyway, thank you very much for telling your story.